Stalingrad, Soviet Union. November 22, 1942, 8 p.m. Generaloberst Friedrich Paulus, 52 years old, commander of the German Sixth Army, receives the radio message he has dreaded for 48 hours. Soviet forces have closed the encirclement ring. His 265,000 soldiers, 20 German divisions plus 2 Romanian divisions, are now trapped in a pocket measuring 30 miles east to west and 25 miles north to south. Behind them lies the Volga River. Surrounding them are 7 Soviet armies totaling 1.1 million troops. Paulus immediately requests permission to break out westward, while his forces still possess mobility and strength. The request goes to Adolf Hitler at his headquarters 1,500 miles away in East Prussia. Hitler's response arrives within 3 hours. The Sixth Army will hold its positions regardless of the danger of temporary encirclement. The Führer forbids retreat. He orders Paulus to create a fortress and promises the Luftwaffe will supply 500 tons of provisions daily by air. Paulus obeys. That decision condemns 500,000 Axis soldiers to death or captivity. The catastrophe unfolds over 76 days as the Sixth Army slowly starves, freezes, and dies inside the Stalingrad pocket. Hitler's no-retreat order, rooted in ideological obsession rather than military reality, transforms a dangerous tactical situation into the greatest German defeat of World War II. Paulus's trapped divisions require 700 tons of supplies daily to maintain combat effectiveness. The Luftwaffe delivers an average of 94 tons per day. By January 1943, German soldiers receive 200 grams of bread daily, 1/3 of subsistence rations. Horses are slaughtered and eaten. Ammunition stocks dwindle to nothing. Wounded soldiers freeze to death in unheated cellars because medical supplies cannot reach them. Soviet forces methodically compress the pocket, destroying German divisions one by one. When Paulus finally surrenders on February 2, 1943, only 91,000 survivors remain of the 265,000 originally encircled. German and Axis casualties, killed, wounded, frozen, starved, or captured, total 500,000 men. The disaster costs Germany its most powerful field army and marks the war's irreversible turning point. All because Hitler refused to authorize retreat when retreat was still possible. Germany's strategic situation in summer 1942 demands decisive victory on the Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa, Day 1941. Invasion of the Soviet Union, failed to destroy the Red Army before winter. Now, 18 months into the Eastern Campaign, Germany faces enemies on all fronts. Britain controls the Mediterranean, American forces prepare to enter combat, and Soviet armies have survived catastrophic losses to rebuild into a formidable opponent. Hitler recognizes that 1942 represents Germany's last opportunity for strategic victory in the East. He designs Operation Blue, a massive offensive targeting Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus. The plan requires German armies to advance 900 miles from their starting positions to Baku's oil fields on the Caspian Sea. Success would deprive the Soviets of 80% of their petroleum, while securing fuel resources Germany desperately needs. But the operation contains a fatal flaw. It divides German forces between 2 diverging axes, Army Group A driving south toward the Caucasus, Army Group B protecting the northern flank along the Volga River. This split creates dangerous overextension across an 800-mile front held by insufficient forces. Generaloberst Friedrich Paulus, 52 years old in 1942, commands the Sixth Army during Operation Blue's advance toward Stalingrad. A career staff officer who planned the 1940 invasion of France, Paulus has commanded the Sixth Army for only 7 months. Meticulous, cautious, and obedient to Hitler's orders, he epitomizes the German General Staff tradition of detailed planning and methodical execution. But Paulus lacks the aggressive instinct and independent judgment that Eastern Front Command demands. He believes implicitly in Hitler's strategic vision and trusts that higher headquarters understands the larger picture better than frontline commanders. This faith in authority will prove catastrophic when Hitler's orders contradict military reality. Paulus commands Germany's largest field army. 265,000 troops, organized into 20 divisions with 500 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and extraordinary combat experience from 18 months of Eastern Front warfare. These divisions represent the Wehrmacht's elite, battle-hardened veterans who have conquered Poland, France, Yugoslavia, and vast Soviet territories. They believe themselves invincible. The advance into Stalingrad begins August 23, 1942, when German forces reach the Volga River and begin fighting for the city. Hitler obsesses over capturing Stalingrad for its symbolic value. The city bears Stalin's name, and its strategic position controlling Volga River traffic. What begins as a limited objective to secure the flank escalates into an all-consuming urban battle. German divisions push into Stalingrad's industrial districts, fighting house by house against Soviet defenders who refuse to yield. By November 1942, German forces control 90% of the city, but cannot eliminate stubborn Soviet pockets clinging to the Volga's western bank. The prolonged urban combat destroys German mobility. Armored divisions designed for operational warfare become bogged down in static siege operations. Infantry battalions that began August with 800 men are reduced to 200 by November. The Sixth Army exhausts itself capturing a city of questionable strategic value, while Soviet commanders prepare the counteroffensive that will destroy it. Here's what Paulus and his staff don't know as they fight for Stalingrad's final districts in mid-November. Soviet High Command has assembled overwhelming forces for Operation Uranus, a massive double envelopment designed to encircle and destroy the entire Sixth Army. Soviet General Georgy Zhukov, 46 years old, has spent 10 weeks secretly concentrating. 1.1 million troops, 1,400 tanks, and 14,000 artillery pieces north and south of Stalingrad. The attack points target weak sectors held by Romanian Third and Fourth Armies, Allied formations equipped with obsolete weapons and positioned on overextended fronts. German intelligence completely fails to detect the buildup. Paulus believes Soviet forces opposite his positions are exhausted remnants incapable of offensive operations. He dismisses reconnaissance reports of tank concentrations as exaggerations. On November 18, 1942, one day before Operation Uranus begins, German Sixth Army intelligence estimates Soviet strength at 400,000 troops. The actual figure exceeds 1.1 million. This intelligence failure, combined with Hitler's fixation on capturing Stalingrad regardless of risk, creates conditions for catastrophic encirclement. November 19, 1942, 7:30 a.m. Operation Uranus begins with artillery bombardment of unprecedented intensity. 3,500 Soviet guns fire for 80 minutes along a 20-mile front north of Stalingrad, targeting Romanian Third Army positions. The Romanians, equipped with captured French weapons from 1940, and lacking anti-tank guns capable of stopping Soviet T-34 tanks, break under the assault. By 11 a.m., Soviet tank formations have penetrated 12 miles, routing 5 Romanian divisions. Paulus receives reports of the breakthrough, but initially dismisses it as a limited attack that German reserves can contain. He continues directing operations inside Stalingrad, convinced the urban battle remains his primary mission. But at 6th Army headquarters, staff officers recognize the disaster unfolding. Soviet mobile forces are driving deep into the rear, threatening communications and supply lines. By nightfall November 19th, Soviet spearheads have advanced 25 miles. The northern arm of the encirclement drives southeast toward Kalach. November 20th brings worse news. Soviet forces south of Stalingrad launched the second arm of Operation Uranus, smashing through Romanian 4th Army positions. This southern offensive mirrors the northern attack, overwhelming artillery preparation followed by mass tank assault that shatters Romanian defenses. By evening November 20th, Soviet tank brigades from north and south are racing toward Kalach, a town 60 miles west of Stalingrad where the Don River bridges represent the 6th Army's main supply line. Paulus finally grasps the mortal danger. He radios Generalfeldmarschall Maximilian von Weichs, commander of Army Group B, requesting authority to withdraw 6th Army westward before encirclement closes. Weichs forwards the request to Hitler's headquarters with his endorsement. Immediate retreat represents the only hope of saving the 6th Army. Hitler refuses. He orders Paulus to hold present positions and prepare defensive perimeter. The Führer believes German willpower and Luftwaffe supply can sustain the 6th Army until relief forces break the encirclement. November 22nd, 1942, 4 p.m. Soviet tank forces from north and south meet at Kalach, closing the encirclement ring. The 6th Army, 265,000 German and Romanian soldiers, is trapped. The pocket measures roughly 30 miles east to west, 25 miles north to south, encompassing Stalingrad and surrounding steppe. Inside the pocket, 20 German divisions, 2 Romanian divisions, 100 tanks, 1,800 artillery pieces, and supplies for perhaps 6 days at normal consumption rates. Outside the pocket, 7 Soviet armies positioning for systematic destruction of the trapped forces. Paulus faces the most critical decision of his career: obey Hitler's order to hold the pocket, or defy orders and break out immediately while his forces retain strength and mobility. Breakout would mean abandoning equipment and wounded soldiers, suffering heavy casualties during the withdrawal, and risking court-martial for disobeying the Führer. But staying means depending on air supply that everyone except Hitler knows is impossible. The mathematics of aerial resupply prove Hitler's promise catastrophically unrealistic from the start. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, assures Hitler that air transport can deliver 500 tons daily to the Stalingrad pocket, the minimum Paulus calculates necessary for survival. But Göring's promise ignores brutal reality. The Luftwaffe possesses only 298 Ju-52 transport aircraft available for the operation, and winter weather over the steppe makes flying conditions terrible. Each Ju-52 carries 2 tons of cargo and requires 2 hours flight time to Stalingrad and return. To deliver 500 tons daily demands 250 sorties, meaning every available aircraft must fly twice daily regardless of weather, mechanical problems, or Soviet air defenses. The operational analysis staff officer's conduct shows the promise is impossible. But Hitler believes Göring's assurances, and Paulus believes Hitler. On November 24th, the airlift begins. The Luftwaffe delivers 75 tons, 15% of requirements. Over the next 10 weeks, daily delivery averages 94 tons. The 6th Army begins starving immediately. December 1942 becomes a month of escalating catastrophe as multiple factors converge to destroy the 6th Army. Soviet forces tighten the encirclement ring, reducing the pocket size through sustained attacks that capture German strongpoints one by one. Luftwaffe supply flights face worsening weather and intensifying Soviet air defenses. Transport aircraft losses exceed 10% per mission, an unsustainable rate that forces reduction in sortie frequency. German soldiers receive starvation rations, 200 grams of bread daily, occasional horsemeat when artillery horses are slaughtered, no vegetables or vitamins. Temperatures drop to -35°C. Soldiers lack winter clothing because supply priorities went to ammunition.
Frostbite casualty exceed combat wound.
Medical facilities collapse as wounded freeze in unheated cellars without anesthetics, bandages, or medicine. Typhus spreads through crowded bunkers. The Sixth Army disintegrates not through battlefield defeat, but through systematic deprivation of everything needed to sustain human life in Russian winter. Meanwhile, 100 miles southwest of Stalingrad, Generalfeldmarschal Erich von Manstein assembles Army Group Don for Operation Winter Storm, a desperate attempt to break through to the trapped Sixth Army. Manstein, 55 years old, is Germany's most capable operational commander, architect of the 1940 French campaign victory. Hitler gives him 3 panzer divisions and orders to punch through Soviet encirclement, create a supply corridor, and restore contact with Paulus. Manstein recognizes immediately that restoring a corridor is insufficient. The Sixth Army must break out to meet the relief force, abandoning Stalingrad and fighting westward. He signals Paulus that Operation Winter Storm will begin December 12th and expects Sixth Army to break out simultaneously. But Hitler has forbidden Paulus from abandoning Stalingrad. Paulus will not disobey. The relief operation begins December 12th. 1942. Manstein's panzer divisions advance 45 miles in 8 days, reaching within 30 miles of the pocket by December 19th, close enough that German soldiers inside Stalingrad hear the artillery fire. But Soviet reinforcements block further advance. Manstein signals Paulus, break out now while escape corridor remains possible. Paulus refuses without Hitler's authorization. Hitler refuses to grant it. On December 23rd, Soviet counterattacks force Manstein's relief force to withdraw. The last chance of rescue vanishes. January 1943 brings the Sixth Army's final agony. Soviet forces launch Operation Ring on January 10th, systematic reduction of the pocket through overwhelming artillery bombardment and infantry assault. German divisions, reduced to battalion strength through casualties and starvation, cannot conduct effective defense. Soldiers abandon positions when ammunition runs out, retreating to inner perimeters that shrink daily. The pocket fragments into isolated groups as Soviet attacks cut communication. On January 24th, Soviet forces reach the Volga inside Stalingrad, splitting the pocket into northern and southern sections. Paulus commands the southern pocket from a basement headquarters without electricity, heat, or food. His staff officers are dying from typhus. On January 30th, Hitler promotes Paulus to Generalfeldmarschal, a cynical gesture intended to ensure Paulus fights to the death, since no German field marshal has ever surrendered. The next day, January 31st, Soviet forces storm Paulus's headquarters. He surrenders the southern pocket, 91,000 German and Romanian soldiers, all that remains of 265,000 trapped 10 weeks earlier. The northern pocket surrenders February 2nd. The Battle of Stalingrad ends. German casualties, killed, frozen, starved, or captured, total 500,000 Axis troops. Only 5,000 prisoners will ever return to Germany. The strategic consequences of Stalingrad prove immediately catastrophic and permanently alter the Eastern Front balance. Germany has lost its most powerful field army, 20 divisions representing 25% of Eastern Front combat strength destroyed in a single pocket. But beyond immediate losses, Hitler's stand-fast order creates a strategic dilemma that will plague German operations for the remainder of the war. Every time frontline commanders request permission to withdraw from threatened positions, Hitler refuses, fearing that yielding ground equals defeatism. This pattern repeats throughout 1943 and 1944. Creating new encirclements and catastrophic losses. At Kursk in July. 1943. Hitler delays retreat until Soviet counteroffensives have destroyed German armored reserves. In Ukraine during winter. 1943. -44. Multiple German corps are trapped and annihilated because Hitler forbids timely withdrawal. The Stalingrad disaster establishes the template. Hitler micromanages operations from distant headquarters, refusing to authorize retreats that field commanders recognize as necessary, and condemning entire formations to destruction through rigid adherence to holding ground at any cost. German generals learn that advocating withdrawal risks dismissal, so they stop requesting it until disasters are already irretrievable. Post-war analysis reveals the compounding cost of Hitler's Stalingrad decision. Military historians calculate that had Paulus broken out during the 5-day window between November 23 to 28. 1942. Before Soviet encirclement solidified and German strength remained sufficient for mobile operations, the Sixth Army could have fought westward with approximately 60% of its strength surviving. Germany would have lost perhaps 100,000 casualties instead of 500,000. More critically, 15 veteran divisions would have remained operational, available for defensive operations during 1943, when Soviet offensives reclaimed Ukraine. The Eastern Front strategic balance in 1943 would have fundamentally differed. Germany would have possessed sufficient mobile reserves to conduct the flexible defense that might have stabilized the front. Instead, the loss of 20 divisions at Stalingrad creates permanent numerical inferiority that German forces never overcome. Every subsequent Eastern Front battle sees Germans outnumbered and unable to create operational reserves because divisions lost at Stalingrad cannot be replaced. The human cost extends beyond immediate battle casualties into almost unimaginable suffering. Of 91,000 German soldiers captured at Stalingrad, only 5,000 survived Soviet captivity to return to Germany, most dying in prisoner-of-war camps from typhus, dysentery, and starvation during 1943-1945. Soviet treatment of German prisoners proves harsh, but reflects conditions barely better than German soldiers experienced inside the Stalingrad pocket: inadequate food, no medical care, brutal forced labor, and death rates exceeding 90% during the first year of captivity. The survivors who returned to Germany in 1955-1956 carry physical and psychological scars that never heal. For Soviet forces, victory costs 480,000 casualties, killed and wounded, during the November 1942 to February 1943 campaign. Total casualties for both sides exceed 1.1 million. One of history's bloodiest battles fought largely because Hitler refused to authorize retreat when retreat was militarily necessary. Historical counterfactuals examining what if Paulus had broken out focus on the November 23, 28 window when escape remained possible. Military analysis suggests that immediate breakout, abandoning all heavy equipment, leaving wounded who couldn't march, and fighting a running battle westward, would have cost perhaps 40% casualties, but saved 150,000 troops, and preserved the Sixth Army as an operational formation. Those divisions, re-equipped and rebuilt during spring 1943, would have been available for the Kursk offensive or defensive operations in Ukraine. The Eastern Front strategic situation in late 1943 might have stabilized rather than collapsing into continuous retreat. Whether this would have changed the war's ultimate outcome remains debatable. Soviet numerical superiority and American material support likely ensure Allied victory regardless. But the timeline and human cost would have differed substantially. Stalingrad represents the clearest case in World War II where a single command decision, Hitler's refusal to authorize retreat, directly caused an avoidable strategic catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Return to November 22, 1942, when Paulus requests permission to break out and Hitler responds with orders to hold regardless of encirclement. That moment determines everything that follows. 76 days of starvation, freezing, and systematic destruction culminating in surrender and 500,000 casualties. The decision reflects Hitler's fundamental misunderstanding of military operations, his belief that willpower and ideological determination can overcome material reality, that holding ground possesses inherent value regardless of cost, and that retreat equals weakness rather than tactical necessity. Professional military judgment, exemplified by Paulus's request and Manstein's assessment, recognizes that preserving fighting forces takes precedence over defending specific territory. But Hitler imposes political and ideological priorities on military operations, treating withdrawal as unacceptable regardless of circumstances. This command philosophy transforms the Stalingrad encirclement from a dangerous situation requiring immediate action into a death trap from which escape becomes impossible. The catastrophe vindicates every principle of operational warfare Hitler violates: maintaining mobility, preserving forces, and accepting tactical withdrawal to achieve strategic goals. Paulus's tragedy lies not in lacking courage or competence, but in obeying orders that professional military judgment recognized as suicidal. His obedience kills 500,000 men. The statistical accounting of Stalingrad provides stark evidence of command failure's cost. German 6th Army strength November 22. 265,000 troops, with 100 tanks, 1,800 guns, and full mobility. German strength February 2, 91,000 starving prisoners, no equipment, and 5% survival rate in captivity. Total Axis losses including Romanian allies: 500,000 killed, frozen, starved, or captured, roughly equivalent to losing 25 divisions, or the entire Wehrmacht force that invaded France in 1940. Equipment losses: 900 aircraft, 1,500 tanks, 6,000 artillery pieces, and 60,000 vehicles destroyed or captured. Time cost: 76 days that German forces spent trapped at Stalingrad while Soviet forces reclaimed Ukraine and pushed the front 400 miles westward. Strategic cost: permanent loss of initiative on Eastern Front and establishment of Hitler's no-retreat policy that causes subsequent catastrophes. Human cost: 500,000 German and Romanian families destroyed, plus 480,000 Soviet casualties during the encirclement battle. The numbers prove that Hitler's decision to forbid retreat ranks among history's most catastrophic command failures, a single order that destroyed an entire army and changed the war's trajectory. Today, Stalingrad is studied in every military staff college as the definitive example of how rigid command doctrine, refusal to authorize tactical retreat, and ideological priorities imposed on military operations guarantee disaster. Modern military doctrine emphasizes mission-type orders that grant frontline commanders authority to adjust tactics based on battlefield conditions. The concept of defense in depth, trading space for time while preserving forces, replaces the stand-fast mentality that destroyed the Sixth Army. NATO planning during the Cold War explicitly rejected static defense in favor of mobile operations that would have withdrawn forces rather than accept encirclement. The lesson transcends military application. In any complex endeavor, leaders who refuse to acknowledge changed circumstances and insist on pursuing original plans regardless of evidence guarantee failure. Hitler had the information to make different choices. Reconnaissance reports showed Soviet buildup, logistics analysis proved airlift impossible, and Manstein's assessment indicated breakout was necessary. He ignored all evidence that contradicted his preconceptions. 500,000 soldiers paid for that arrogance with their lives, dying in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad because one man refused to admit that sometimes the only rational decision is retreat, and that preserving your forces to fight again proves more valuable than dying for worthless ground. The Volga's banks became a monument to the catastrophic cost of command inflexibility and the timeless truth that in warfare, as in life, knowing when to withdraw often requires more wisdom than knowing when to fight.